Hi everyone, my name is Judith Kulig and I'm happy to talk with you today about this whole idea of resilience and its interrelationship with disasters. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there with you today. I'm from Southern Alberta. I was at the University of Lethbridge. I retired from there at the end of December. And this particular week, I'm in Fort McMurray, where I'm involved in a project related to the impact of the wildfire from last year. I'd like to acknowledge the number of people that have contributed to the studies over the years related to resilience, including, of course, the funders, as well as the participants in a number of different communities. So I was really fortunate in where I was born and raised. I was born and raised in a small community in the Southern Alberta area called the Crow's Nest Pass, which is an amalgamation of a number of different small communities. But this community was really unique because it had a number of events, disasters, unusual things happen to it that meant that people had to respond to some kind of adversity. And that's how I really got interested in looking at this whole thing of resilience and communities and impacts. So one of the first things that happened in this community was this amalgamation of individuals from a variety of countries around the world where they worked in the coal mining industry. If you're at all familiar with mountainous regions and coal mining areas, you know that that's often synonymous with tragedy. So there's a picture there of the Turtle Mountain after the slide. So this was a mountain slide in our country that started in 1903. They think maybe around 100 lives were lost. No one is really quite sure. But it was a very extensive event that caused the closure of the railroad and caused a lot of people to work together to rebuild this particular place. Coal mining, as I said, is a very important part of this area. It is the site, meaning the Crow's Nest Pass, is the site of the worst mining disaster, coal mining disaster in Canadian history. 189 men were lost in the 1914 Hillcrest mine disaster. The Turtle Mountain had fallen in 1903, even before we became a province, and then along comes this coal mining disaster. So again, there was a lot of national attention and a lot of internal looking and dealing with risk and working together as a community to become stronger and better. So those kind of things help me to understand that it would be really important to figure out and generate information about why it was that communities were able to work together and stay together and be successful. So I worked with some other individuals and we looked at different communities that had to deal with adversity. And in this case, we looked at these three communities: Hinton, Hardisty, and Riverside Meadows. That is an urban neighborhood of Red Deer. And each of these communities dealt with something: environmental issues, the attempts to have an intensive livestock operation developed there and whatnot. So this was also in combination with the research that we'd done in my home community. The next area of research that we worked on was looking at impacts of communities from wildfires. And this really, I would describe it as the mother lode of our research. We started with the Lost Creek Fire, which occurred in my home community in 2003. We added to that two other studies looking at the fires of McClure Fire in the Barrier area of British Columbia, part of the BC 2003 firestorm, and the Mallard Fire in LaRonde, Saskatchewan, which occurred in 1999. We were just finishing up that study when we were invited to work on the Slave Lake Fire and the impacts of that fire. And of course, that was the 2011 fire. We know that wildfires are a very serious concern in our communities and in our country. And we know disasters are on the rise. In 2014, more than 12.4 million Canadians 15 years and older personally had the experience of dealing with a disaster. And we all know that there are huge and ongoing impacts from the Fort McMurray wildfire of 2016. So in all of this work, we looked at this concept, this idea of community resilience. And one of our participants talked about it as a community that's willing to pick up an issue, work with it, and decide what they want to do about it without blowing the place apart. I think that's a wonderful quote, a wonderful way of talking about this whole process. Resilience is this thing about a process that it describes change. It recognizes strengths. It helps people to make improvements. It helps people to make a difference in their community. It's about dealing with adversity in such a way that the community gets stronger and changes. At one time, there was a lot of discussion about individual resilience and the notion of a rubber band, that when you pull a rubber band, it moves back and forth. And then the idea of individual resilience was that people would go back to where they were after some event that they had to deal with. But we've looked at it as this process of not going back to where it was, but getting stronger and getting better. We know it's related to time. We know it's related to the number of people and how strong they are in their community. And so we've tried to understand that over the years. We've done well over 300 interviews in a number of different communities, like I've said, and we've talked with people and done field work and done household surveys and all sorts of things to try to figure out what this is all about. And so that's what I want to share with you today. I also want to flag for you that there has been a greater discussion and greater information about disasters, and there are some people that talk about disaster resilience rather than community resilience. And they focus on characteristics such as a community that's functioning well under stress, that there's successful adaptation, self-reliance, and social capacity. And this is mostly from the Australian work. And my belief is that it's community resilience, and there's different kinds of impacts, and disasters are one of them. There are other kinds of things, economic downturns and so on. So my preference has been to use community resilience rather than disaster resilience. But I wanted to make sure that you understood that that was a possibility of you seeing this in the literature. So this is the model we've created about resilience over the last 10, 12, 15 years of research. And there are 3 parts of it. And you'll see that it's a systems model, a feedback model. And what I mean by that is that there's movement within this particular model. So the very top, you've got 2 aspects. You've got this development of this interactions as a collective unit. You've got a square box there that talks about a sense of community, and those are interrelated. And around that is this broken circle, these broken lines, and things impact through those lines: outside influences, mine closures, economic downturns. And at the same time, there's this issue of health status. We know and discovered from our research that individuals with higher levels of resilience have a higher level of health status. We also know that when people are well, whether that be emotionally, physically, socially, spiritually, that they are more able to react and respond and be positive for helping to influence resilience in their community. We know all of this stuff goes together, and there is a community action that is a result. And that's what I'm going to talk about next, each part of this particular model. So going back to the first part, which is that interactions as a collective unit, you'll see that there's a number of really important characteristics there. People need to get along. And when they get along and are able to cope with divisions and change, they have a more positive outlook. They're more hopeful. There's networks that are created. There's a sense of problem solving done at the community level. And this involves leadership. And I don't just mean leadership that's elected in, but I'm referring to leadership that's local and grassroots, and people are working together. So I just want to say again that the combination of these characteristics together leads to that expression of a sense of community, which is this slide. So in this particular case, it's important that communities have pride and they have a sense of belonging. So as I said, there's all these things that come together. There's this creation of a sense of community, this community pride, and there's a sense of belonging. And I want to add to that there's a sense of spirit as well, not just pride, and that the sense of belonging and the community pride is a result of that sense of community. And I've got a picture there of a story stone, and this is from our Riverside Meadows project. And people there created these story stones to signify their community and its history and the importance of that to them. So that's like a visual, tangible, real perspective of what happened in that community. And then, as I said, with those 2 things happening, then you lead to a community action. And community action is a whole variety of different things. It totally depends upon the issue that's being addressed in the community depends upon the people that are there. It's very much based on local leadership, people working together, people having creativity and ideas and the freedom to think outside the box in order to do things. So one of the communities that we worked with had to deal with an intensive livestock operation that wanted to move into the community, and they worked together to have that stopped. So they did a whole variety of things as a community in order to do that. They brought in people like David Suzuki. They had public information nights. They had letter writing campaigns. They did all sorts of things. When I look back to Barrier and the McClure fire, their community action was about commemorating the fire. So they did something special at different anniversaries. They had things like carvings placed at the area where the fire started to commemorate what had happened. So again, that depends entirely on what the community is all about and what they're interested in dealing with. So these things together really is focusing on this process of resilience. It helps that we think about it as a way that allows people to meet their capacities. They need to feel empowered, and they need to be empowered. It allows them then to rise above situations. We have to be adaptable. We found that people can deal with issues much better. And that, as I mentioned before, resilience is a thing that fluctuates with circumstances and changes over time. It's more about a process, but it does lead to a product. But that product is that stronger, resilient community that can attend to whatever is thrown at it. We knew that community recovery is also linked with community resilience. And this McClure Fire participant said, resilience means that if you get knocked down, you have to look forward and get the community to grow again. You have to get rolling along and get back to where it was. I think that's a wonderful way of talking about what happens to communities when they have these experiences. I would also emphasize that we did find things that enhance resilience in all these communities that we worked with. Having a positive, proactive attitude among the residents was really important. There's always been a puzzle about how many resilient individuals do you need to have a community that shows resilience? And we don't have the answer, and I haven't met anybody that does. But it is important to know that there is some kind of link between the kinds of individuals and the number of individuals and their characteristics and that resilient community. We know that it's important to have leadership, and as I already mentioned, it isn't just about elected leadership, it's about local leadership. Volunteerism is extremely important. A sense of belonging is important. But we know there are things that also enhance resilience. Lack of personal resources such as money, lack of leadership, things like the lack of opportunity to debrief as a community is also really important and something that needs to be addressed within communities. And I'm meaning to certain events. So when people had things happen to them like wildfires or whatever, it was important that they had a chance to address that issue afterwards. We continue to work on this whole notion of resilience and trying to understand it and trying to break it down. So this particular slide is showing that there are things called enhanced resilience and there's a natural resilience. So enhanced resilience, and this is what we found from Slave Lake, talks about the fact that there is leadership, involvement, positive attitude, a common ground, that there are these social interactions, that people have an attachment to place. And these things are all interrelated, as you can see by the arrows. And at the same time, there is natural resilience, that there is this idea that there are personalities, and those personalities are based on the environment. So in Slave Lake, people talked about rural living and winters and the disasters they had to deal with. And this led to hardworking people and tough people and self-reliant people. And at the same time, there was this economy. There was wealth and there was jobs, and that enhanced resilience. So we know that these things are also important as well because we want to be able to bolster resilience. We want to be able to think about what are ways to do that. What are some policies that help with that as well? And we'll talk about that component next. So in order to understand policies and so on related to resilience, I want you to understand that we've worked at developing a mechanism to actually measure resilience. So what does that mean? Well, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see this subject heading, the Index of Perceived Community Resilience, and that's what we have created. And it is a scale that we've used in our household surveys within our wildfire studies. And it focuses on leadership and empowerment, that shouldn't surprise you, community engagement, and non-adverse geography. And we've linked it to this concept of Buckner's work on cohesion. And he talked about the importance of psychological sense of community, neighborhood attraction, and neighboring. And he talked about cohesion as belonging, a willingness to cooperate together. So we wanted to know, is there a relationship between those two? What comes first? So here's a diagram that just visually shows that, our ponderings about what is the connection between these things. What's the connection between cohesion and resilience? And why is that important? It's important because if we know how to intervene, if we know how to enhance resilience, then we know we can make places stronger, we can make people stronger. So in Slave Lake, we found 1 year after the fire that in terms of cohesion, you needed all those things at high levels in order to impact community engagement. In our other studies related to wildfires, what was more important was the psychological sense of community on community engagement. That is the key message there. This whole thing about community engagement, if we can figure out ways to enhance that, we will enhance resilience. So think about that. What does that mean for your community? How can you engage people in your community? What does that mean? So if we look globally at what do our findings mean for disaster preparation, I believe very strongly that building resilient communities pre-disaster is key. And we all have a role in that. We have a role of that as individuals, as community members, as elected officials, as grassroots operators within these places, as people that are involved, with our kids and families and involved with different organizations, nonprofit and so on. We all have a role in building that resilient community. Now, in terms of disaster preparedness, I have bolded and italicized 3 points that are particularly important for our discussion today. We want to promote community resilience through community events and activities. We want people to be engaged with one another, and we want people to be familiar with one another. And we can't do that unless we actually see each other, talk to each other, get out of our homes, get to the community halls, whatever it is, whether that's the cleanup by the river or whatever, but we need people to be engaged. We need to have intersectoral collaboration before the crisis hits. One of the reasons Slave Lake did so well post-wildfire was that they had a interagency group already involved, and they had an interministerial group already involved with one another and already knew each other. And those became the natural leaders after the wildfire to deal immediately with the aftermath for individuals and the community. And we must have family supports in place. We know from a lot of good research related to wildfires that when families are stressed post-wildfire, post-disaster, and they're dealing with so many things, that the negative things start to rise, whether that be domestic violence, return to abusive behaviors in terms of substance abuse, and so on. So we need to prevent that from occurring. So again, the underlying message is the engagement of one another to enhance that community engagement. After the disaster, again, there are opportunities to foster community resilience. We want people to enjoy themselves and be together and support one another. Again, Slave Lake is a good example. They had what they called squizzle nights at the pool, and they were free nights. It was swimming and pizza. People got to be together and forget about the wildfire for a while. We know that we need to have what are referred to as temporally targeted intervention approaches. And we know that we need to do these in order to enhance neighboring behaviors, in other words, getting to know and maintaining relationships among neighbors. And we also know we need to encourage that psychological sense of community. I want to be attached to this place, I want to belong to this place, I want to contribute to this place. We need to plan occasions for acknowledging the recovery efforts, whether that be some kind of dinner, event, whatever it is. And in addition to that, we need to continue to have those activities and events post-disaster for some time after that disaster event does occur. So this is my last slide, and this is talking about this individual from La Ronge who said, please tell me that all the pain and suffering that I went through was for the good of somebody else. In other words, there's lots of disasters that have already occurred. There's lots of wildfires that have already occurred. And there is lots of lessons learned out there about how to be together and how to work together. I believe that resilience is the basis of that. It's a framework that's useful and usable with other disasters besides wildfires, floods, all sorts of things. But it's also useful in other kind of events like economic downturns. It helps us to understand there is this important process where people can come together, work together, be stronger together, and deal with that adversity and move forward. I hope my comments were helpful, and I wish you the best in your symposium. Thanks very much.